Congratulations if you've made money off of NVIDIA today. It is up more than 16% after a nice run to the upside off of earnings. And mRNA up 13.53%, and AMD up more than 10%. And the stock that I'm going to go over for you today on the 5-minute time frame is AT&T. We ended the day at $16.59, down more than 2%. The day's low, $16.42. The day's high, $16.77. This is where we ended. To the north side takes us to resistance and a potential take profit area at 1664. This gap forms at 1677. Two standard deviations and resistance and another potential take profit area, 1686. This gap closes out at three standard deviations, roughly 1698. And at four standard deviations and another take profit area, $17.07. To the south side, negative two standard deviations is 1644, 1633, and 1622. And obviously there are many levels in between. I have a smaller linear within another linear regression, which I like to track sometimes just for fun. Or you can put in VWAP and look at that, your Fibonacci replacements, your trend lines, even these grid lines you could use to kind of gauge where price could be headed. This is an old buy-in line here of mine, so ignore that. And previously I sold out at $18.11. This was a trade that I made for my mom, and I jumped off the gravy train at roughly 11%. Obviously, many gaps to play to the upside and to the downside. And as I take a look at this, I have not tracked it in quite some time since I got out. I stopped looking at it. So this gap made it, closed out. This gap closed to the upside at roughly 1783. Now, what I'm thinking about is, and we've got a gap to the south side here. We are not in the channel, not in the zone, but we've got a gap within a bigger gap that would take us all the way down to 1436. Again, we're not there, but we are in a downward channel. I'm thinking about putting in a buy order in. This is Thursday night, and putting it in maybe here, or that would be great if I could get it along this line. I never expect price to go to -4 standard deviations unless really like something is terribly wrong with the stock, or we wick to the south side for a run back up. But I never bank on that. But I will bank on 2 standard deviations. So if I want to be conservative and get my price, I would wait for down here or here or here. So I might just do that and get in for my mom again and ride it to this gap closure. And then there's another gap above that will take us all the way to 1968. That is a long ways off, not even close. Now the 1-year price target on this puppy is 1955, which represents a 17% return from where we are. And that is the gap that would take us to the 1-year target. Look at that. I don't need to be an analyst, but I can kind of figure that out. Then the target after that is $25. Again, way, way off in the distance. Another galaxy. All right, the next stock I want to go over is Square. I want to thank Murat for pointing this one out. I am in this trade. I haven't looked at it in a little while. But we ended the day at 67.96, up more than 5%. The day's low, 65 65, the day's high, 68.44. The 1-year price target, $82.61, which represents a 21% return from where we are. It seems like we can't get there because we've been whipped around so much with this stock. It has tanked in the past, and hopefully there are better days ahead. But this is where we are. To the north side, let me mark out this gap here. To the north side takes us to 2 standard deviations and resistance at 68.90. This gap closes to the upside at 69.38, 70.18, and 71.47 roughly. To the south side, back at the middle of the trend and the baseline. And the middle of the trend is where price always goes from, if it's on the high side, back down to reality, or from the south side back to the middle of the trend and back to reality from the south side. 66.36, 65.68 is a gap that begins and fills out at 64.53, and 63.79, 62.54, and 61.26. I did buy in previously at 60.65. All the pink lines, previous buy lines, and then the green lines, previous sell lines. Typically is how I like to mark out my chart. And earnings here. Reported estimate 0.45, 0.58. Surprise of negative 23% here. And the reported revenue, 5.773 billion. The estimate, 5.697 billion, for a surprise of 1.33%. So Murat says Square reached $77 by the forecast on Q4. The forward PE ratio is 22. It's cheaper than ever right now. So he likes this stock because it's gotten cheaper. And a good forward PE is between 10 and 25. Apparently, they say anything under 10 could be a value trap, and anything over 25 is just too expensive. So he's done the research. It's at 22 right now. I never look at that. I'm terrible at that. So I really appreciate his help checking this out and doing the fundamentals. And looking left, there is a gap that takes us all the way to 71.84, and another one that I've talked about in past videos that takes us to 77.23. And to the south side, I haven't marked out any new gaps to the south side. If you go back on the daily, the weekly, and the monthly, you can check out those bigger gaps as well. And right now, oops, darn it. There we go. The RSI is at 51 and turning down on the 5-minute. See, never expect the RSI to stay up here without crashing down to the south side after hitting what I think of as resistance or being overbought. Now, when it hits support down here, which I consider support or being oversold, then that's an interesting area for me and a potential buy-in. So I'll let it ride it down here and then think about possibly getting in again, because there is a gap to the south side here. On the daily, turning up. On the weekly, turning up. And on the monthly, also turning up. That's great to see. All right, yeah, here's my ugly chart from a long time ago on the monthly time frame, and ever since TradingView changed their calculations, I can no longer use the linear on the monthly. It just looks so wonky and horrible. I don't even like to look at it. I just look at the RSI and I'm done. But the weekly, this looks better. Yeah, it's still messy because I've tracked it out so much in the past. And just playing the smaller linear here. This is where we are. One area to watch out for takes us to roughly 78, which would close out this gap. That makes sense. And then another potential area takes us to roughly $97. Let me switch this back to the 5-minute. Previous support and resistance lines, all those horizontal lines, so ignore that as well. So I will leave it at that. Oops. Again, thank you to Murat for pointing Square out to me. And that does it for me. That's a look at T and SQ on the 5-minute time frames.